This is How to Draw. I'm Levi Smith. Today we're drawing a witchy owl on some pumpkins. Start by drawing this rectangle. Keep the edges kind of rounded and notice how I taper the bottom just a bit. Add a small curved line about 1/3 down from the top of the rectangle. This is the head of the owl. These shapes off the sides are parts of the wings. From here, we'll add a wavy line that crosses through the very top of the owl's head. Then add a couple lines from the edges of the wavy line toward the head for the brim of the hat. Draw on some lines underneath. Curve these lines down just a little bit. For the top of the hat, draw these lines up to almost a triangle, and add these angled lines to complete the bent point of the hat. We'll draw in a simple hat band, following the angle curve of the bottom line of the head. For the face, we'll start with a center grid line, keeping these lines under the hat line. Draw some large ovals that fill the space in the head, and a small beak. Remember to keep your lines light or use pencils for this process. Add some small circles inside the large ovals. We'll expand on the wings by drawing these small lines under the head. We'll draw some feet at the bottom, just 3 simple ovals in a cluster for each foot. Next, I'll add this partial circle for the owl to sit on. This will be the main pumpkin. Draw a couple more half circles on either side for more pumpkins. And one more larger circle around the owl. This will be the moon. We'll add some lines to the pumpkins. For the back pumpkins, I'll add this small circle to the top and draw the pumpkin shape lines from that. On those little circles, I'll draw out the vine stem and wrap it behind the pumpkin. I'll add a little spiral here as part of the vines. These leaf shapes are very simple 3-pointed leaves. We can add these wherever we like. They also work well to cover areas that might be confusing or difficult in the overall piece. Add the stem for the other side. Notice how I make the shape twist back as it goes behind the pumpkin. Some more leaves. Notice how simple I'm keeping these shapes. More little spirals here and there. This kind of element helps to keep a piece like this from being too symmetrical. These 3 V's in front of the moon will be bats. We'll get back to those later. While these shapes down here are similar to the leaves, they're to indicate the ground plane, giving our drawing a place in space. And that's our shape layout. From here, we'll add some details. Let's start with some eyebrows on this owl. Draw these angled lines pointed down towards the center, and add a smaller circle inside the eye circle. Follow the outer oval with some zigzag lines. Aim the zigzags towards the eye as it goes towards the beak. Do that for the other eye. Reinforce this eyebrow line and extend it out from the head. Add some very slight zigzag lines out from the eye line. Another quick layer of zigzag lines for the outer perimeter of the head. For the wings, add this oval shape from the head to get the shoulder parts of the wings. Add some simple scales for feathers. Then some vertical lines here in the bottom parts of this wing. A softer zigzag under the head for a neck ruffle. And a few more of these W shapes for more feather detail here and there. The feather line above the feet should be more distinct. You're going to put a shadow here later. I'll reinforce the brim of this hat and draw out the top part of the owl's eyebrow. Some of these lines on the side of the hat band will give it some extra thickness. And we can darken some more lines that we want to keep. Some simple fold details here in the hat. For the hat lines, I simply curve them inward to give them some added dimension and weight. Let's add a face to this front pumpkin. Start with a curved guideline around the middle of the pumpkin. I want the face to be a bit creepy, so I'm going to make these triangle lines very sharp and severe in their angles. A line for the top of the mouth, another for the bottom, some basic triangles for the teeth. Position the bottom teeth to make a zigzag for the opening of the mouth. We'll come back to this later. Just work on a couple of random details here, and then we'll reinforce some primary elements. For the pumpkin stems, I add some lines from the pumpkin ridge to the stem, making the tree roots of the stem there. We'll do some more reinforcement. I'll also add some texture details to the pumpkin stem. A few quick details in the feet. The details on the other pumpkin stem. And darken the outer lines. For some of these leaves, I'm adding a center line that I'll use for the shading. Finally, we'll get to these bats. Start with a curved line from the outer tip toward the center about halfway, and then scoop it back toward the primary line into the point. And then add a dark spot in the middle for a body. Off the bottom, scoop the line out 1/3 of the way, then scoop it again 2 more times to the body. Repeat for the second wing. Top outer scoop, inner scoop to the center, scoop down from the edge, and 2 more times to the center. So easy. Let's do it 2 more times. My only issue with these bats is that I made them too small. We'll do a quick reinforcement of this moon circle before moving on. We'll darken the outer lines of the owl and the hat and fuss over a few areas here and there. And that's the details. Next, we'll shade this in. I start the shading with the underside of the hat and a bit of shading for the beak. Notice I just shaded the one side. And we'll add some shade to the neck and then thicken that area to give the head some extra definition. Right under the brim, above the eyebrow. For the eyes, I want to mark out the highlight before filling them in. Bit of shading under the wings. And this bit of detail is important. Make these feather lines around the eye start from the inside out and stop before they get to the eye. This helps maintain the clarity of the elements here. You can do it from the outside in, but it is easier doing it from the inside out. More shading in the body. I work this out from the sides towards the center. Then we'll shade under the body around the feet. And just a bit of light shading here and there. A nice bold line for this pumpkin. Let's shade the hat. I add these edge lines just on the inside of the forms. They'll be my guides for where I shade it all in. Shade the hat all the way to those edge lines. This will give it a bit of lighting detail effect, and will add a lot of contrast to the piece overall. And it hides some of my construction lines. And a layer of light shading on the rest of the owl. Then we'll shade the stem of this pumpkin. And darken these little nooks and crannies. So many nooks and crannies. And these leaves, you'll notice that I generally keep the shading to one side of that center line. Shading this pumpkin, I start with these guides, curved to follow the pumpkin shape. Then we'll shade under these lines, light it first, and then we'll add more layers as we go. Shade in these leaves. Even when I shade in the whole leaf, I still shade one half a bit darker than the other. Shading this vine, you can see how shading the tip helps the whole thing stand out better, and shading its base tucks it behind the pumpkin. I'll do a little bit of hatching here behind the patch and the moon. Let's go back to this pumpkin and add another layer of shading, and a bit darker still along the bottom. We'll shade the stem on this other pumpkin, darker as it goes behind the pumpkin. We'll thicken a few lines here and there. Shade this leaf. A few quick guides on the pumpkin, and a few layers of crosshatch shading. Shading in this ground element and adding a few bits of additional detail. I fuss over a few things here before getting to the rest of the background shading. Using vertical lines, I want to make this sky shading feel different from the shading of the owl or pumpkins. Let the shading break up around the top of the moon. And let's get back to the pumpkin face. We'll make the corners of his eyes a little bit more edgy here. And I want the smile more sinister, so I push out the edges of the mouth, and the gaps in the teeth go just a little past the guidelines. Let's fill all of this in with black. I follow the zigzag pattern in the mouth with the shading so that I can do it quickly and with fewer mistakes. Once this fill-in is done, we'll add some final details to this pumpkin. Reinforce some lines here, add the shading guides around the form, and do a light layer of shade. Let's extend the shadow from the owl onto the pumpkin. Have this next level of shading on the pumpkin follow the ridge lines to build up these shape values. From the owl, follow the shading down, using those ridge lines to complete the look. A bit of horizontal shading to build up the sky background, especially going darker in these nooks and crannies. A bit more shading around the moon, and then darken the outer lines. And we'll fill these bats in black. Just a few odd details here, and we're done. Thanks for watching to the end. Don't forget to give it a like and a subscribe, and check out my merch, art books, and socials. All those links are in the description. We'll catch you later.